We're going to have a little bit of a delay here till we get everything going. We apologize. I'm just waiting for mine to start. All right. Apologize, we're a little bit late this morning. We were having a good time of fellowship talking about it. Good morning. This is June 23rd, 2024. This is Odessa Wesleyan Church. Journey through the Bible, and we're still in Epic 3. And this morning we're going to go back a little bit to Exodus 11:31, but we're going to continue on into chapter 14. So just a little side note here. I know we've had some comments. If you have questions, please go ahead and put down, hey, stop or whatever. I can see it here on my screen, Pastor Tammy. We can monitor as well on live. And even if you're not live, if you have something, please, again, you can, if you have Messenger, if you don't want it where everybody sees it, a question or a concern or even a prayer concern, especially a prayer concern, or you would like to talk to one of the pastors about something, and you have Pastor Tammy has Facebook Messenger. I have Facebook Messenger. You can find the church email as well. So please do that. We're going to try to do, if I don't happen to be looking at the screen, jump up and down. Turn on your camera and jump up and down or something to get our attention. All right, so let's open up in prayer. That's a good place to start this morning. Heavenly Father, we thank you. We thank you that your grace, your power, your love, your focus on us is always there. Even in the darkest times of our life, when we can't see your light is there, and it will come through. Remind us of this, Lord. In your name, amen. All right, so Exodus chapter 11, verse 29. And we've talked about this a couple times the past few weeks. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, the firstborn of all the livestock as well. Pharaoh and all of his officials and all the Egyptians got up in the night, and there was a loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. And during that night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Up, leave, you and all the Israelites, go, worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks, take your herds, as you have said, and go, and also bless me." The Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise, they said, we will all die. So the people took their dough before the yeast was added and carried it on their shoulders in kneading troughs, wrapped in clothing. The Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. The Lord made the Egyptians favorably disposed towards the people, and they gave them what they asked for, and they plundered the Egyptians. Imagine this. The time had come. Freedom is now a reality. No longer is it a dream, no longer a hopeless desire. The Israelites, who are direct descendants of Abraham, Isaac, Israel, I put in parentheses Jacob, who were unjustly enslaved for over 400 years in a land that their God had blessed, that their God had saved from destruction. Those very same people enslaved them unjustly. Their ancestors who roamed the land and who were promised, look around, this land that you are a foreigner in, that you are, in essence, a migrant in, someday will be yours. But yet, that promise for 400 plus years didn't come about. Of their own time and also the darkest of the night, their slave master said, "Get out, go, And not just that, he said, the Israelites said, well, could I have some gold? Sure, take whatever you want. Could I have some jewels? Take it. Could I have, some more herd? Take it. Just leave. Just get out. Go. We don't want you, this God that you guys serve in our God. Remember, we talked about how Pharaoh in the Egyptians' mindset is God. This God does not like us, and we all of a sudden now he's not just destroying our crops. He's not just destroying our water sources. He's not just touching our bodies with disease. He's like touching our very household. Not one, keep that in mind, not one family from Pharaoh all the way down to the lowest prisoner lost a child. Anyone who was a firstborn male, from all of them, just instantly, and not just, we've just gone through the pandemic. We've talked about, other pandemics that have gone through the history of mankind where you have great numbers of people, but very few times you see all of a sudden instantly thousands of people die at once. This was one night, they went to bed and never woke up. Your neighbors, your relatives, your son, your firstborn grandson, everybody, just instantly, death. You imagine the fear that the Egyptians had of the Israelites. I don't know about you, but I would want them as my next door neighbors. Certainly not going to keep them around anymore as their slaves, because all of a sudden, poof, light went on as, the biggest sunburst in the world of, we don't like these Israelites, get them away from us. The only thing they want is to be set free and go north to this land. Let them go. Just get out of here. Now imagine the Israelites. Again, you've been slaves. They're not, keep in mind, it's been over 480 years, depending on the, what historical, biblical historical data you want to look at. But let's round it up, 500 years. Anybody alive that was in that original group from Joseph and Israel? Nope. Any even great-great-grandfathers? Nope. So you have lived in your fathers and your grandfathers, your great-grandfathers, and you get the point, have been slaves. That's all you have known is slavery. And again, you have this feast, and you're just ending this feast because the Israelites, this Passover feast they're just wrapping it up at this time. Because remember, they didn't start cooking it, really start preparing it until the sun went down. Lamb doesn't get, they didn't have ovens. They had to build the fire. They had to roast it. Then they had to let it cool. And they had to serve it and eat it. That in an instant, you're a slave, and now you're a nation. Not just set free, but you're now a nation. Not just a people group, not just a family. You're slaves, and now you're the nation of Israel. Now, you still don't have the land, but politically, culturally, religiously, you are now a nation. Keep that in mind the next couple weeks as we start looking at the growing pains. I'll be nice because we can be a little critical, but the point is that some of this too is, to make a connection, not just from these ancient words written thousands upon thousands years ago. The point again of this whole journey is to make the connection of those ancient words and a different world to 2024, wherever you are. I'm not going to say just in Odessa, New York, but wherever you are listening, watching this, whatever time it is, to make that connection. So, a couple things here I want to bring out. Again, let's go back. So we saw that power, but think about the plunder. Think about, God said to Moses, tell the people when it is time to leave to ask their slave masters for anything, and they will give it to them. The Israelites are like, okay, yeah, sure. Let's get a concept when it says Israel plundered Egypt. Again, think of pirates. We hear the pirate legends when the pirate plunder. We've all heard that, right? And talk about how, and when unfortunately the Europeans came to the New World and they plundered, the riches of the civilizations there. And there was just a story I saw on the internet this week of how one of these recovery experts discovered this ship, and it literally the thousands of pounds of gold that had been, for about the past 300-400 years, one ship had sunk. That ships upon ships, did that. That the Israelites plundered Egypt. Let me give you a little bit of a concept of how rich Egypt was and how poor Israel made them. November 4th, 1922, King, parentheses, Pharaoh, Tut's tomb was opened after 3,300 years after his death. Tut died approximately 100 to 200, and this is something that I learned this week, 100 to 200 years before the scripture we just read. Again, history, biblical history, sometimes we don't match it. Good thinking. He may not necessarily been the Pharaoh during the time of Joseph, but he probably was the Pharaoh after, because right after his death, he was a young king, is when we start seeing, as we talked about earlier, this civilization shift politically, religiously, economically, right after Tut's death. So this was like just before the Exodus. So vast riches were discovered in the tomb. We talked about the Egyptians a little bit to understand their religious idea. They believed that when you died, you had to take resources with you to the afterlife. Now, I'm not saying this is true, so don't. This is not theology. This is historical context. So, if you wanted to be the same person in the afterlife as you were in the earthly life, you had to take the same amount. So think about it. If you were a general, your tomb would be filled with weapons of war and your armor and all that, because you were going to, or else you wouldn't be a general in the next life. If you were a mighty king with riches, you would be buried with that, so your prestige would remain the same. So, King Tut was buried with his riches. Just one thing. Just one thing I'm going to point out here. His casket was 1/8 of an inch thick. Get the concept here for a minute. 6 feet long, weighing 243 pounds of solid, pure gold. Worth today, I looked this up as of Friday, so the 22nd, I looked at the gold market. Ready? $9,248,448,000,000. I'd like just a couple ounces of this too. Think anybody could do that? We could do a lot in this year. Oh, we're funding. Yeah, sorry. Please don't send me stolen gold. But think about that for a minute. If Tut was that rich, and go ahead and Google that later just to see. I remember as a child, National Geographic, that was just enthralled me that, I used to have that. I don't know where it went, probably cleaning out stuff, but I kept that. That's one special, just in all the riches. I think it's when they brought, probably back in the 80s, when they brought it to, I think it was probably the World History Museum there at Smithsonian, brought it into DC. So National Geographic did this whole Their journal that month was all about. It amazed me then, but then when I went back, I thought, just his casket. His casket. Think about that in our world. Okay, yeah, caskets are all right. If you ever planned a funeral, sometimes you can kind of spend a lot of money, on it. But something you're putting a dead body in, $9 million. And think of that, just that, but then all the other. So the Israelites being slaves with nothing. Just when you are a slave master, you don't, pay your slaves barely a living. You don't pay them a wage, but they're have enough to exist, just strong enough to go do the tasks that you expect them of. Again, this is how our God thinks. I'm going to take these people's slaves with the herds that they have, just enough to keep their families alive. They didn't participate in commerce. And I'm going to put them in a land a few hundred miles north with nothing. Go back and look at the early settlers, the ones more successful, the Pilgrims. Not so much the Jamestown. They've kind of, got the greedy thing of, searching for the gold and almost died out. But the Pilgrims, go back and do a little Google of what they brought with them. They didn't just show up, say, "Hi, we're here. We're gonna, live in this new world." They brought with them what they needed to start the land, to survive for the first few years until they could start using the resources of their new home. The Israelites didn't have very much resources. So God said, there's a big old bank and people owe you for 400 years of slavery. We hear this word reparations today. That's kind of what God did. Go get the reparations from your slave masters because, hey, I blessed them. I saved them. They took advantage of you. They're going to pay you back. That's Pastor Brian's version of the Bible. But that, I think, is what it was. So whatever they asked for, they were given. The reason why is because they didn't have, I forgot to bring a little thing, they didn't have a $20 bill to go buy things. Yeah, neither do I. But their currency, quote unquote, was trade. Gold, jewels, precious stones, cloths, harvest was how I would give you, a precious stone. You would give me seeds for the spring planting. I want to, buy, a cow off you. I would give you a chunk of gold for it. I'd buy property. You see, there wasn't, I give you a $20 bill, I go to the bank and write you a check. There wasn't that. During this time, throughout the whole world, up until this idea of coins even, we won't really see that until the kingdom in Israel under King Saul. That's when we first start seeing the Israelites having coins. It wasn't until probably Alexander and the Greeks and then the Romans carried that, where you didn't just, pour a little gold dust onto a scale and that was, what's this worth? Well, it's worth a talent of gold. Okay, so let me give you a talent of gold. Instead, that's what they did at that time. It wasn't like, now we say, well, it's 99.99. Okay, well, let me 1, 2, 3, 4. They didn't do that. So again, God thinking of his people. They need, when they get to the land, they need to still deal in trade and commerce with the surrounding people. They need resources. So this is a display of God's great power. And the Egyptians wanted Israel out so bad, whatever they asked. And I think as it went along, imagine this, one guy coming back with a bag of gold and, his next door neighbor, Joel says, "Where'd you get that from?" Well, the slave master over there. I walked in and said, "Hey, I need stuff. Here's a bag of gold. Just Don't go near me because your God may strike me dead. Literally. Okay. Joel goes over to another one. Maybe a general in the army and says, "Hey, ex-master, I'm leaving. Here, take my wife's jewels. Go, just go, get out of here, go." So they literally took everything. It wasn't like the Egyptians go, we were really bad people, and we enslaved you for for centuries and centuries, and I think it's time. Why don't you guys go have your freedom here? Let me give you some parting gifts. You know how a reverse housewarming gift. You guys are leaving, so here, let's give you some gifts. So they plundered the Egyptians. Again, I strongly believe God. We know God created us as we are. I think God had a good sense of humor too. So you thought you were pretty cool. You thought you were pretty powerful. You enslaved my people. You're a bunch of rich guys. Good for you. Your slaves are just walking out with all your riches and everything that because of my blessing and my grace, they now have. What would happen after this? Egypt would go through centuries of dissension and revolutions and fights, and their power would diminish. Modern day historians, probably if you read historians up until the late 1800s, had a different view about what I'm about to say. But modern historians, things happen. Up until the 1850s, if you read Egyptian history, they'll pinpoint to the same time and say it had to be, the Exodus, when they lost a whole nation of slaves. When you have a society that is dependent on slavery, and that power is taken from you, to take another human being and make them prosper your bank account, your society will collapse. Go back to the 1860s. We had to fight a war over that to prove that point. That when you are dependent on abusing another human being for your own benefit, and that power is taken from you, your whole system collapses. So let's look at something else here that seems another point here. The root. If you have the Bible we've been using, the Chronological Study Bible, I think I got it here. If you go in the back where the maps are, the second map in, I'm sorry if you're here in the front, I apologize. If not, if you have a Bible, so they're not really labeled, but if you go to the very last typed page is 1640. If you go not to the first map, but the second map that we use, or if you look, you will see most Bibles have maps in the back, and they could be labeled as, this one here is labeled Exodus and the Conquest of Canaan. Some will, say, the ancient world during, the Exodus time or something like that. So I'm going to hold this up here. I'm sorry. So we're looking at this map here. Camera's not great. So I'm trying to get a picture here. Or you could probably Google this, okay? So if you look at this route that everybody here got theirs looking at it. So you put your finger on Goshen. That's where the slaves mainly lived, all right? And if you go over you'll see this little tiny white line that says the Wadi of Egypt, W-A-D-I. And then if you move your finger over, all of a sudden you see this kind of yellow outline. That's the land Abraham walked around, and Isaac walked around, and Jacob walked around. That's the land that they came from. So that's what we would call the promised land. Then take your index finger there, put your thumb on Goshen, and go, I don't know about you, I'm not really a map maker. I'm not a great trip planner. That would be the route. If you're going to move a bunch of people from Goshen to there, that's the way you go, right? Here's something neat. Sorry about that. 3 routes during this time. And actually, the first route still used. 3 routes if you're going to go from there. From there to there. So if you're going to go from Goshen to what is the Promised Land, there was 3 major highways. Okay, there was the north one, the most direct, that hugged the coast. There was the south one that avoided the desert, what we would call Saudi Arabia now, so that little kind of a triangle part there, because in the middle part is all nasty desert. You don't want to even take, one guy on a camel across the desert, right? So you would hug the coast and then you would go all the way down out of your way and go up. And then there was another one that used that second route. You came to a Y. You could go north to what we would call today northern Iraq, and then eventually to the Far East. Or you could kind of go northeast back into what we would now call the Promised Land and connect into the first route. So, again, you're a leader of a people. Let's all play make-believe for a minute. You're a leader of a people, and you're going to move a whole bunch of people. We'll get into the numbers here next. We'll do a raise of hands here, and we can't do this on the internet, but we'll do some interactive stuff here. What route would you change if you're going to move, let's say, 10 people with no modern transportation? You're walking, you're riding camels. And let's even say you've got enough resources to make the journey. Let's not even talk about forming a country right now. So you have enough resources to make the journey. You're going to take the first route or the second route. So who's going to vote for the second route? Anybody? Who's going to vote for the first route? Which one is easier to use? The first route. Right. You have the sea. And if you look, it's populated. That's the major trade route. That's the major trade route that has been used for thousands of years. And that's the major trade route that was used up long past Jesus' time to past the apostles' time, that it was used during the Middle Ages, and is still being used today. If you were to go from Syria and want to travel to Egypt, you would take about the same route. Not necessarily the same road, but you would hug the coast all the way down, because you don't have the 2 things we talked about. You're near the sea, you avoid the desert, but also there's a mountain range that runs right down. See, again, in the Bible we have that yellow area, the land of what would become the land of Israel. There's a mountain range. We have a lady here who's a hiker. The rest of us are not hikers. We're not going to go to the mountains. I'm going to stay on the flat. All right? So, we all agree the most logical route is the first one. A couple problems with route number 1. I'm gonna pop your bubble here. And again, I'm looking at chapter 13, 17. Sorry, I forgot that. So look at the land of Goshen. Take your finger and go up through where it says the Sinai, and circle into the Mediterranean Sea. That is the northeast corridor of the Egyptian Empire. You're just freed slaves. You're not the most popular people in the Egyptians. You're going to your freedom. You're going to walk through the middle of their military-controlled land? Nope. That these people were slaves. No military training, no military resources. And it says here, God knew. Again, God's knowledge. Human beings, if we were going to plan this trip, we'd go, let's get to the land now. Let's take the most popular route and go. God faced fighting and adversity, they would give up. Chapter 13, I'm sorry, I forgot to put the extra. They would be discouraged. They would be slaughtered. The central route, going through that desert, it's a no man's land, no resources. For, great if you have camels and you take your water and all that, but again, the people didn't have that. So God took them through the southern route, down through the area that Egypt kind of, they controlled, but nobody really hung out there. That he took them there. It still had resources, but the people needed to be strengthened up to realize that they're independent. They can't wait for their master to give them the food to eat. They can't wait for their master to give them the task. They needed some time to form themselves. It was sparsely populated, so they weren't going to be facing enemies. And it was the least desirable route. Now, as we'll see next week, where Pharaoh all of a sudden changed his mind and decided to go after the Israelites. Again, you just had your slaves leave you and they're escaped you. You would think they're going to go north. So that's where I'm going to put out, send out messengers and tell all my commanders in the northern area, watch out for them. And when you see them, let me know because we're going to wipe them out. Nobody would go route number 2 through the middle of the desert. And why would you, if supposedly they're, again, over there in Israel, because again, the Egyptians knew these people claimed to be from this area, why would you go all the way thousands of miles farthest away from it, the opposite direction? That if you're here in Odessa and you want to go to Montour Falls at the bottom of 224, are you going to drive out to 224 Junction, drive down to Horseheads, come back Route 14 up through Pine Valley, Millport, all the way through to Montour? No. I mean, if you're out for a drive and you like paying $4 worth, a gallon for gas, that wasn't a political comment. Do not give Pastor Brian comments. Send them to Pastor King. Logically, if I got to go down to the Dollar General and grab a gallon of milk in Montour, I'm not going to drive that way. I'm going to drive the opposite way, down the hill, the easiest route. Why did God take him that way? He had his reasons. Here's a unique little thing. God didn't just say, hey guys, go. Don't miss that little tiny little kind of offhanded comment. Oh yeah, there was an angel of the Lord, which means the high angels. Okay? We talk about like the angel Gabriel that visited Mary. We're talking about the angels of angels, the leader of the angels, an angel of the Lord. I almost interpret that as the commander of the angelic army leading the Israelites. This wasn't a story among the Israelites. Hey, I think there's an angel up there. I think leading us. When an angel appears before you and says, follow me, it's pretty obvious, right? And a pillar of fire. I'm a firefighter. A pillar of fire. I've seen some pretty big fires, but a pillar from the ground up, where no matter where you could stand, you see this burning butt. Remember that burning bush? One step bigger. It's not burning anything, just the air. There's not wood. There's nothing. And it's moving, people, not moving flat like a fire does. It's like this. It's a pillar moving. And then there's a cloud behind you. Think about that for a minute. I don't know about you, but I think even the most, what's the word I want to use? The most so-so Israelite believing in God, I think that would convince me. He sent an angel, he sent fire, he sent a cloud. So, there's that. We talk about the Red Sea, and you see that mentioned. But we look at the maps that we have here this time. They're not called Red Sea. We believe, again, what historians that fight things, that at the least it could have been, you see down there below Goshen on the map that we have here in this Bible, it says the Great Bitter Lake. Some biblical historians, and critiques said, well, it was probably that. It wasn't really a sea. It was a big lake because these people were kind of desert dwellers and blah, blah, blah. When they saw this big body of water, they thought it was a sea. No, because this land of Goshen wasn't desert, folks. This was a land where they grew crops, they grew their cotton, they farmed. They weren't desert dwellers at the time. So probably not that. Most likely, the Red Sea was, if you look down, this name that is still named today, the Gulf of Suez. Basically, a chunk. So what my point is if you go farther down, you see what's labeled as the Red Sea. Did they go all the way down across that? Maybe. Most likely, they went down, and where you see that route, they actually probably didn't get on that route. They went parallel to the road, that second route, or the third route here we talked about. And then they had to cross the bridge that went across to the Gulf of Suez, right? Nope, no bridge. They waded across, right? Because it was ankle deep. Today, without any touching, there was no dredging in the 1800s when they built the canal. What was the name? I lost that. The Suez Canal. Duh. When they built the Suez Canal, that Gulf was there. That water flows into the man-made canal, then flows into the Mediterranean Sea. The Suez Canal is so big it handles aircraft carriers. Okay? An aircraft carrier. Yep. Aaron's all excited because yeah. Aaron has actually been on that. Okay? Think about that. How give us a concept as far as building, Aaron, that an aircraft carrier would be. One, it has what, about close to 5,000 people on it, right?
The best way to describe an aircraft carrier is sideways, skyscraper.
Laying down.
The one that I was on was only 700 feet shorter than the entire ship.
All right, so I'll repeat what he said unless if you didn't hear it. So again, Aaron was based during his Navy career. He was on an aircraft carrier that actually went through the Gulf of Suez, the Red Sea, Mediterranean Sea, the canal. Okay, this Gulf is so wide, so deep, it can carry the Empire State Building minus about 700 feet this way. Empire State Building is this. Lay it on the ground. Okay? These people weren't going to wade. They weren't going to swim. They didn't have boats. And all of a sudden, God says, well, you're going that way. God, we didn't get on the road. We look across. There's the road over there. We'll get to that next week a little bit, how that happened. So, again, names. Remember we talked about, again, names change over time. We talked about that, and I'm not going to get in there because we're getting a little close here today. So how many people are we talking? Again, another biblical critique of, well, it can't be that. The Bible clearly says 600,000 men because, again, another example of, male-dominated society. Nope. How you took a census during that time was what your number one important thing to worry about if you were going to be a nation is how many men of fighting age you had. Didn't matter how many women and children were running around. Didn't matter how many slaves. How many people could strap on a sword, grab a spear, and go attack an invading army in a second's notice? That was your population strength. That didn't matter that you had thousands, and I'm not, not downsaying this, okay? Didn't matter how many preachers you had, how many doctors you had, how many lawyers, how many teachers, how many mechanics, how many nurses, how many children running around your schools. What mattered is when things got real and you were getting invaded and it came time for war, how many you had. Because the kings would go, the army north is, strapping up their swords and coming at us. They've got 10,000 men in the army. I've got 1,000 men in my army. Oh, we can handle them, guys. We can do this. Yeah, maybe it's treaty time. Or the reverse. You got 100,000 men ready to go. And the little nation over here with 50,000 guys, oh, we can kick their tushes and fight a war. Okay, let's go. So that was what they based on. So the biblical writer here says 600,000 men of fighting age. To be a man of fighting age, you had to be probably about 13 years old. That was when you became an adult in their society. You were adult in your society. It wasn't like us, who more and more we see, like, my children are, in their 30s, approaching the 30s. They're not married, don't have grandchildren. Subtle hint. My wife gets crazy when I do those things with my kids, but whatever. When it comes time, they'll have them. You got married. You instantly started producing children because children were a sign you wanted to expand your nation, expand your family name. So those men of fighting age had at least one wife, had at least one child. So add that on to a minimum 1.8 million people.
I'm going to check something
Go.
here that comes out of this
Mhm.
study Bible. I had not realized this, but Numbers backs this up. In chapter 12, verse 38, it says, a mixed multitude went with them also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so there were other nationalities that left
Mm-hmm.
Egypt for whatever reason they wanted to. And it says this mixed multitude included Egyptians and other ethnic groups who had their own reasons for leaving. Some of these people later caused trouble when things did not go smoothly or as anticipated. And then it goes on down further to say that some of them took their slaves with them.
Yeah.
The Egyptians who were slaves, some of them had higher positions in Egypt and had their own slaves, and they took their slaves with them. That's like, okay, I never knew that.
And we're going to bring in coming weeks as we get to the whole setting up a nation and we get into Leviticus, and some people are going to look, and Pastor Harry and I were talking, it's in the Bible, you read the Bible. We'll get to some of that stuff, but again, think about that. Let's just, like Tammy said, but let's just throw all that out. We're going to go a little long today, because I want to hit this here. Just 1.8 million people at the very minimal. I would say 2, maybe even 3 times that. That is taking, again, concept. That is taking the combined populations of Schuyler County, Tompkins County, Yates County, Steuben County, Chemung County. The combined population, and moving them hundreds of miles on foot. You are absolutely crazy if Moses did not have divine inspiration and divine power to do this. Because I'm sorry. Leading human beings is like herding cats, folks. I've been in leadership all my life at various roles. Trust me. Think about that for a moment. That's just 1.8 million men. You got toddlers running around. Toddlers aren't going to go, okay, let's walk in a line down this dusty, dirty road. Oh, look, I sweat. It's like these little things prove, folks, you got to, if you put one little tiny faith in God, I'm going to warn you the danger of that. It's going to grow and grow and grow and grow. all you got to do is start with that very first thing, that God is God, and his word is God's word. And I'm going to warn you right now, the danger of continuing this study is it's going to change your life and change your thinking. No matter how long you've been with God, or you just think this is a very nice book of poetry and history that's a little off, and the science thing is really whatever. But this is a very nice thing. God and this Jesus guy, they were kind of cool. I'm going to warn you. You keep on this study, this is going to change your life. I want you to keep with it.
Amen. Keep going.
So, we're going to go a little long, but we'll cut it off in time to get ready for church here. All right. So the importance of the firstborn. Remember that again. And then we're going to I'm going to skip over that because we've talked about that a lot. So what does all this mean? All this history. What does this mean to us? God said to the people, chapter 14, or excuse me, these words here. In the days to come, when your son asks, and that's a translation, today we could put when your child asks, what does this mean? Talking about the rite of circumcision, the Passover meal. What does all this mean? You are to say to them, with a mighty hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed the firstborn of both people and animals in Egypt. That is why today I sacrifice to the Lord the first male offspring of every womb and redeem my firstborn sons. And it will be like a sign to you on your hand, a symbol of your forehead, that the Lord brought us out of Egypt with his mighty hand. The importance of honoring, remembering, and abiding by the lessons of history. George Santonian said this, and a lot of people think it was original Winston Churchill. Churchill being a great historian. I mean, he was a great prime minister, a great leader, great speaker. But Churchill, if you ever read his biography, was first and foremost a historian. That's what he went to school for. That was his passion, was history, especially the history of the British Empire, and that's why he strongly fought for it. If you read, or not read, but if you watch the Netflix show The Crown, my wife's British Commonwealth citizen, Canadian, so I kind of got interested. But if you watch during the early years of Elizabeth's reign with Churchill, Churchill was deeply passionate about preserving the British Empire, for good or bad. Okay, so a lot of historian was on that, but Santonian wrote this: those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. I was like, what's so bad? I kind of like our history, Nice. He wasn't talking the positive. If we don't learn from the mistakes we've made in the past, us, our children, our grandchildren, and generations from now will make worse mistakes. God said, celebrate the Passover every year. Celebrate this rite of circumcision. Go to the temple 8 days after your firstborn has been 8 days old. Bring your firstborn and do one or two things. Sacrifice it on the altar, which we're all not going to do, or select an offering in its place to redeem it, because the firstborn belongs to me. Why? Because the Egyptians wouldn't honor me, and I took their firstborn. Because and we'll see this later on, this I forgot what they called it, I'm sorry. But this was things that as a 13-year-old male, and now today as a 13-year-old female, in not just the most Orthodox Jewish sects, but just the common I'm Jewish, quote unquote, that never go to temple again. This was something you memorized to say in Hebrew. Those passages, plus your mother was a slave in Egypt. Your father was a shepherd, and I chose them out of the land to be my people. You remember who you are. So when Israel comes to cultural, military, economic might, wow, we're pretty cool. Look at all we did. Look at all the harvest and all this. Look at all the lands we picked the butt. We were, my grace put you there. So we look at history, biblical history, history period. We don't gloss them over. We don't scribble them out. We learn from them. We learn God's grace and what He's done for us. And we teach it to other generations, whether it's our physical children or our spiritual children. Those that are coming along in the faith, we teach them about God so that they will live. I'm going to leave you with this. In the coming centuries, whenever Israel, the nation, was at its spiritual and religious peak, it also was at its economic and military peak and political peak. These descendants of slaves had mightier nations come and make treaties. Remember the whole concept of covenant? The big guys in the world came to this former slave land and said, hey, we don't want any problems. We want to sign treaties here. You be nice to us, we'll be nice to you, we'll trade. Think about that for a minute. When they moved themselves away from the ways of God, other nations started trampling them. And not just trampling them like whoosh, bunch of people come through. We're talking enslaved them. You hear that? Enslaved them. There was a direct correlation in Israel. So the final note for today. Let's go back to Genesis 50:25. You only have to turn there. You can read this for yourself later. Genesis 50, verse 25. Actually, verse 22, I'm sorry. 50:22. Joseph stayed in Egypt along with his father's family. He lived 110 years and saw the third generation of Ephraim's children. Also the children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, who were placed on Joseph's knee. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but surely God will come to your aid and take you out of this land and be to the land he promised to an oath of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath. God will surely come to your aid. Well, we don't need any aid. We're good. We're relatives of Joseph who saved the mightiest empire from famine. God will come to our aid. Okay. Guy's dying. He's losing his mind. God will surely come to your aid, and you must carry my bones out of this place. So Joseph died at the age of 110. And after they had bombed him, Israelites don't embalm people, remember? They wrap him in cloths and they bury him in a cave. After they embalmed him, so Joseph was buried as an Egyptian. Because again, Egyptians, your body rots, decays. You don't go to the afterlife. The modern movies of the mummies that look like skeletons, that's wrong. They believe they went through this embalming process so your body was preserved so that when you got to the afterlife, you were whole. Okay? So Joseph was buried as an Egyptian. After they embalmed him, he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. Cool. Exodus 13:19. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the Israelites swear an oath. He said, God will surely come to your aid, and you must carry my bones with you to the place. And we will see later on when they did finally enter the promised land, they went to the cave that Abraham owned and placed Joseph's bones in the cave. Well, that's kind of cool, those abstract connections that just happen. Nope.
Coincidences.
Folks,
Tammy and I have been to.
you've been to there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very good.
So I leave you with this. God's true to his covenant. God's true to his promises. It may take 480 slavery, folks. I know that doesn't sound pleasant. You may be forced to live in a foreign land. You may have done great things for your spiritual practices for other people. And what do you have to show for it? Nothing. You're enslaved. You had his promise. But understand, trust God. Place your hope in God. Obey God's tenets. And it will come to reality. It will come. That's, again, that message. God wants a relationship with you. He will do anything. And he has done everything to bring you that relationship. You get to do the easy part. But also sometimes the challenging part. Trust him. Obey him. Place your hope and love in him. Next week, we're going to look at, I promise, Exodus 14 through 16. Let's close in prayer really quick. God, you're amazing. In our darkest, deepest night, when you tell us to put on the traveling clothes, to quickly roast the lamb, not to put yeast in our bread, you've done all these nasty things to our enemies, and we're still not free. Help us remember when our slave master says, get out, that it will come.
Mhm.
Lord, you know what enslaves us.
Mhm.
It may be economically. It may be something spiritual. It may be sin. It may be cancer. Whatever it is, those who are listening right now, we all battle some enslavement, Lord. But you can, will, and have set us free. Help us to grasp onto that reality and look for the day my Redeemer heard and rescued me.
Mhm.
In your name, amen. All right, folks. Have a good
When
week.
you start next time.
Probably around 14, 15 to 16. It's all dependent on God. All right, folks. Have a good week.
Wait until you hear my sermon. I promise you.